Welcome to the Pathways to Success. I'm Julian Placino, recruiting professional turned success speaker, show host, and media entrepreneur. This show is dedicated to helping you find your unique pathway to success by having conversations that educate, inspire, and transform. Together, we'll interview some of the world's greatest leaders and uncover their secrets to success. Thanks for tuning in, and on to the show. Welcome to episode 211 of the Pathways to Success, where we have conversations with inspiring leaders about their mission and their keys to success. I'm Julian Placino, your host, and we have a tremendous show in store for you today. It is my pleasure to welcome Texas gubernatorial candidate, Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. Colonel West, welcome finally to the Pathways to Success.
It's good
How
to
are
be
you,
with
sir?
you, Julian. Good morning. Thank you.
It is great to be with you here. So, Colonel West, I'm excited for our conversation, and I know how divisive conversations about politics can be. And because of that, I'd like to guide our conversation in a way that is not emotionally driven, but more so by logic, data, philosophy, and critical thinking. So my call to action for our audience in attendance, and thank you all very much for being here, and of course, everyone tuning into the live stream, is to do your best to suspend judgment and perhaps any kind of preconceived notions that you may have about political thought, and rather join us for an honest conversation about ideas, how these ideas can translate into policy, and how these policies could create results and outcomes for the people of our great state of Texas. So with that being said, Colonel West, I'd like to get started.
Let's do it.
So as I mentioned, I know you don't like to hear about what we're going to be discussing beforehand, but there are three themes I would like to unpack.
Yeah.
Number one, your political philosophies.
Sure.
Number two, reasons for running for governor. And then lastly, of course, your personal keys to success in your professional and personal life.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
That's great. Let's do it.
Let's start with philosophy.
Sure.
Sir, you are a Christian constitutional conservative. So much of what I see that causes conflict nowadays are simply the definition of words. So help us understand once and for all, what does it mean to be a conservative?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that the roots of conservatism. You have to go back and you read the Second Treatise of Government with John Locke, the English political philosopher, who many people call the father of classical liberalism, because that is what today's conservatism is all about. And classical liberalism is based upon the idea that the individual is supreme over the government. And John Locke, challenged the normal thought process of that day, the normal philosophy of that day, which was divine rights theory, which said there's a king or a queen, a duke, a duchess, a prince, a princess, a feudal lord that were the people that determine your buy and your leave, what you could do, what you could say. Your pathway to success had to go through them. But what John Locke came along and said that this thing called natural rights theory that said that every individual, all of your rights naturally come from your creator God, the Judeo-Christian God. And what were those rights? Life, liberty, and property. Now, Thomas Jefferson read that, and of course, when he constructed the Declaration of Independence, he said that our inalienable rights endowed to us from our Creator are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when you read down through the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson quoted by saying that the laws of nature and nature's God, and he talked about the consent of the governed. And so he created in that Declaration of Independence and established a nation, unlike any other nation that the world has ever known, where the individual is preeminent over the institution of government. Now, the challenge that we have today is that that relationship is getting off kilter. And I think you see that with a lot of these edicts, orders, mandates, and decrees, which means that we're going back more so to a constitutional monarchy instead of a constitutional republic where we are supposed to be governed and not ruled. So really that comes out to be the philosophy that I believe in because, as a member of the United States military, and I served in the Army for 22 years, we don't take an oath to a political party. We don't take an oath to a person, a president. We don't take an oath to anything other than the thing that binds us together, our rule of law, the Constitution of the United States of America. And when you study and understand the Constitution, what James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton did, they took the precepts and the concept and the ideas of the Declaration of Independence and they codified it into law. And they made sure that your rights as an individual, as a citizen, not a subject, not a serf, were preeminent in these United States of America.
So for those who are, let's say, honest seekers, who don't consider themselves expert at politics, but really want to make a difference and really start to formulate their own political ideas, what would you say would be, let's say, the 2 or 3 core values of conservative ideals? Well,
number one, that the individual is sovereign. It is their rights, their freedoms, and their liberties. And we respect that. Our Judeo-Christian faith heritage is fundamental to that. When we think about education, we want to make education part of that ability to have the equality of opportunity and not the quality of outcomes.
Right.
And there's a huge difference between that. And I will tell you that I see myself as a living example because in 1961, I was born in a blacks-only hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And so when you think about a kid born in a blacks-only hospital, 60 years later, he's sitting here with you, running to be the governor of one of the largest states in the United States of America. That's a quality of opportunity that says no matter where you're born, no matter where you come from, you as an individual have the ability to rise to be whatever you want to be. And I think that's why you see the success of our free market economic system here in the United States of America, because it is not top down, it's bottom up driven. It rewards people for their ideas. It rewards people for their entrepreneurship. It rewards people for taking that risk to go out there and say, I have an idea and I want to work through that idea. And that's why in 245 years, this really is the greatest nation that the world has ever known.
So what I'm hearing primarily is it's the value of the individual over government.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So how would you contrast this to, let's say, liberal values or liberal ways of thinking? What would you say is the biggest point of distinction between the two ways of thinking?
You bring up a great point, because what I call them the progressive socialist left has been very good at doing is hijacking language. And so I remember a time when I was in the airport, and you can tell when people recognize who you are. And this person, I saw them, and they were like figuring out, should I go up and say something? And they ended up coming up and saying something. And so they introduced myself, and they said, "You're Alan West, yes, and what's your first name?" I don't agree with you, but I respect you for your stances. And I said, "Well, what do you not agree with?" He said, "Well, you're too far to the right, and everything like and I'm a liberal." And I said, "Well, I'm a classical liberal." I said, "What kind of liberal are you?" And that freaked them out, because people don't understand the words that they're using. And so when you talk about liberalism originally, going back to John Locke again, was about individual rights and freedoms. But now liberalism today has been hijacked, and it's a word being used by progressives, socialists, Marxists, communists, statists. And they're getting us to believe that what they really care about is the individual, when they care about the suppression of the individual and their rights and freedoms. And so I think that's why we have to have that conversation, and that's why we need to have the open dialogue. And that's why I get so upset when I look at our college and university campuses that are supposed to be a place for the free exchange of thoughts and perspectives and ideas, but yet you have a dominant perspective, and anyone that tries to say anything against that, you're squashed. It's so interesting when you have an organization that calls itself anti-fascist. That's what Antifa stands for. But yet they attack people that don't think as they do, which is the nature of fascism. And so we need to have this open conversation where we go back and we understand these things, just the same as basic civics. When I grew up, and maybe some of the people here in the audience when they were growing up, there used to be a thing called Schoolhouse Rock. They came on ABC Saturday mornings, eating your Frosted Flakes, Rice Krispies. And it talked about all the fundamentals and foundations of this country. I mean, from grammar or whatever, but it talked about civics. I mean, I hope and pray that I will, but today I'm still just a bill. It talked about how we do these things. But we're not teaching civics. We're not teaching the foundation of America. There are many people that go out there and you ask them, what is America? They say a democracy. America is a constitutional republic. We have a representative democracy, but people don't understand these concepts, ideas, and words. And so when you talk about liberalism, and there's a great quote from Abraham Lincoln called his liberty and tyranny quote, because some people believe that liberty means what you can do with yourself and the product of your labor. But other people believe that liberty means what they can do with you and the product of your labor. And Lincoln said that here are two completely incompatible things that are called by the same name, liberty. But in the end, one is liberty and one is tyranny. So I wish that we could have these sit-down conversations like we're doing right now and peel the onion back on some of these words and some of these labels that we're using out in the public sphere.
So let's peel it back even further then. So what is the word we should use? You are conservative. What would be the opposing viewpoint to a conservative? What is the word we should use?
It's progressive socialism.
Progressive socialism.
And this is exactly what people say that they believe in. And what are the tenets of socialism? I mean, socialism, first understand, it's an economic model. And as an economic model, it believes in wealth redistribution. You hear people say that. It believes in nationalizing economic production under the control of government. You hear people say that. It believes in creating and establishing a welfare nanny state, a dependency society. You hear people say that, and you can see that in the policies. It believes in what I call social egalitarianism, which means everyone's equal. And what do you hear people talk about today? Equity, which means equality of outcomes, not equality of opportunities. And the fifth thing that socialism believes in is secular humanism. And you see that. Now, that economic model, when it gets in place, it leads to a change of the societal model, and that is where communism comes in. And so you can be a socialist, but you don't have to be a communist, but you cannot be a communist unless you're first a socialist, because that economic model leads you to a change in the society. And, these are the principles and theories of Karl Marx. And so, again, I wish people would pick up the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx and read some of the tenets of his planks that he has in there. Case in point, the property tax system that we have here in the state of Texas is really rooted in the philosophies of Karl Marx. Why do I say that? It's a progressive tax. The first person that ever talked about a progressive tax, meaning the more money that you make, the more money that you earn, you're going to be taxed upon that or your property. And they also, Karl Marx talked about the elimination of private property rights. So here in Texas, you can pay off your land, pay off your mortgage. Can you truly own your home? No, you can't. You're basically renting that from government. And the other thing was, who was the first person that ever talked about state control, meaning government control of education? It was Karl Marx. And so here we are, and I just wish we could sit down and study and read and understand these things. That's the challenge that I see for us as an American people.
So explain the economic model that emerges from conservative thought.
The economic model that emerges from conservative thought is free market entrepreneurship. Why? Because the conservative thought elevates and believes in the individual, and it rewards the individual for their daring. There's the great saying of the British Special Air Services, the SAS, is who dares wins. And that's why our country has been winning, because people sit down like the Wright brothers, say, let's figure out how we can fly. And they do it. And all of the different things that you can see in this country, from information technology, medical technology, banking, finance, whatever, it is because the individual has been given the opportunity to sit and think and create. But if that is taken away from you, and one of the things that I'm very concerned about is the path that our system of education, which used to be one of the greatest systems of education in the world, gold standard, is now becoming a system of indoctrination. And we're not raising the next generation of critical thinkers. We're teaching young people how to take a test. And teaching a kid does not mean teaching them how to take a test. It means getting them to understand, critically think, and explore their mind. And so that, again, comes back to the preeminence of the individual. When you're doing things to elevate the individual, that's what conservatism is all about. And that's why you have that free market economic system.
So this may seem like a very simplistic question, but make the case, especially again for those who are wrestling with these ideas. What would you say is the best supporting evidence that conservative thought and policies are better for society overall?
Venezuela.
Okay.
Venezuela was one of the most prosperous nations in this hemisphere. Oil and gas reserves to rival Saudi Arabia. Then someone came along with a socialist economic model by the name of Hugo Chavez. And what was the first thing that Hugo Chavez did? He took away private gun ownership, because progressivism, socialism, Marxism, communism can only advance itself if it can't be resisted, because it has to be through intimidation, fear, coercion, whatever. And look at Venezuela today. In Venezuela today, people are going to garbage dumps to find something to eat. People are fleeing that country. So show me anywhere in the 20th century all the way up to today where progressivism, socialism, Marxism has created success. And personally, I saw that as a young lieutenant in 1985, January, February 1985, when we had just finished some training in West Berlin. And we got the one day to go through a very narrow defile called Checkpoint Charlie. And on the other side of Checkpoint Charlie was East Berlin. And I saw the difference. When you were in West Berlin, you saw a thriving economy. You saw people that were happy. You saw businesses, all of those things. When you went over to East Berlin, what did you see? You saw people that were depressed. You saw empty shelves in stores. You saw people that, they had no individual rights and freedom. You saw a secret police that were following people around. And so that is the contrast. But we're not teaching that anymore, about what was on one side of the Iron Curtain, what was on the other side. But the one thing that I remember when I went over to East Berlin, I looked up at all the buildings, the apartment buildings, every single antenna was pointed toward West Berlin.
So what would you say well-meaning liberal progressives see in this particular way of thought that perhaps conservatives do not?
I can't explain it. Albert Einstein once said that the definition of insanity is to continue to do the exact same thing and think you're going to get different results. And so I look at a place like Austin, Texas, the capital of Texas. Everything that we believe in, and that city council is doing different, and you see the results. You see the crime. You see the rise in homicides. You see the homeless situation. And so I don't understand why some people believe that following a philosophy of governance that is antithetical to the philosophy of governance that established the United States of America, that has made this an incredible, successful, and prosperous nation, that they would want to go down that path. And I think that what we have to do is draw the contrast between two things: economic empowerment and economic enslavement. And when I talk about enslavement, there are two ways to enslave people. One way is to work people for no pay. The other way is to pay people for no work. And when you drive around, even here in Texas, and you see all of these small businesses that have help wanted, hiring right now signs out there, but yet we have a government that has a different philosophy of governance as established for this country, and they're paying people not to go out and work. What does that create? Economic empowerment or economic enslavement?
Enslavement. Yeah. So make it easy for us to understand then. Conservatives see the role of government as what? Liberal progressives see the role of government as what?
I think progressive socialists see the role of government as to be, in power and in control, and basically, dictating every aspect of your life. Case in point, the medical freedom issue that we're dealing with right now.
Right.
When a person that calls himself the President of the United States of America steps up to a podium and he says, this is not about your freedom. First of all, every American should say, time out. And then he proceeds to say that I am making the decision that you must get this into your body. That's not America. What conservatism would say is that here are these different therapies, protocols, and treatments that we're going to allow you to understand, we're going to educate you on them, and you make the decision about what is best for your body. And I think that's the clearest difference right now, what we see happening.
So let me ask you this. I believe that in order to defend a position, you should be able to defend it at its strongest points and its weakest points. Mm-hmm. What would you say would be the single best argument against the effectiveness of conservative policy?
It's emotional. And you always hear the other side, that's what they talk about. We care about people. We love people. We want to give people something. We don't believe that America is sovereign. America is just a piece of land in between Mexico and Canada. Anybody wants to come here, you can come here. And we're going to give you money for coming here. We're going to give you $450,000, up to $1 million. It's all emotional. Mm-hmm. But when you sit back and think about it, do they really care about people? But that's the line of attack that people take. It's just the same as right now, you look at what is going on in our school systems. People that believe that the only way that you fight racism is to create more racism. Yeah. That's the basis of critical race theory. So in other words, we care about tackling this thing called racism by saying right now, one group of people, because of their skin color, they're oppressors and they're evil, and they need to embrace that. You need to embrace your white privilege and all these things. And I need to embrace the fact that I am a perpetual victim because of my skin color. The neighborhood that I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, is called the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood. That's the neighborhood where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born and raised, and where he's preached and where he's buried. And I will never forget the words, this incredible quote that I think applies to where we are today. Dr. King did not want a country where his children would be judged and based upon their color of their skin. He wanted to be based upon the content of their character. But yet here we are in America going back and judging people based upon the color of their skin and not looking at their character. I think those are the type of things that we need to come out and express to people and get them to think about that.
So what do you think is the key to bring people together?
I don't like it when Americans come together when we get attacked. Americans should come together based upon our fundamental principles and values. And when we get away from those fundamental principles and values, that's where we see ourselves in this situation where we are. And so, you're not going to win over everybody. And when I was a commander in the unit, I knew that I was going to have soldiers that just didn't like me. But the thing is that I had to make the decisions to prepare them so that when we did go into combat, their lives would be protected and they'd be well trained. So I think the thing that we have to do right now is challenge the American people to be better informed, to be better educated, and to think. We're not challenging Americans to think. We're not challenging Americans to be responsible and accountable. Everybody else is to blame for whatever. So that has to change.
What's the one question that everyone should ask themselves to help them start to figure out what their philosophy is?
Do I really know what the United States of America stands for? And if you don't know that, then you're going to have difficulty. Mark Twain once said that there are two most important days of your life. First and foremost, it's the day that you were born. Second, it's the day that you find out why. And so I would challenge people to ask themselves, Do I know the answer to the second most important day of my life?
Before we move into our second topic, what else would you like our viewers and anyone who's watching right now to know about your political philosophy?
You know, I wrote a book that basically laid it out. It's called Guardian of the Republic, and, you know, why I believe as I do, and because my parents raised me that way. You know, my parents were registered Democrats. John Lewis was my congressional representative growing up, but my parents raised me with the philosophy that you don't want to be dependent upon anybody, that education is the key, that my dad taught me that wherever you go, you find out what the standard is and you exceed that standard. Never be a victim. Never use your color as a crutch. And I just think that we need to have, first of all, we got to get families back together. I mean, we are decimating families across the United States of America, especially in the black community. You know, when I was born in '61, the two-parent household in the black community was between 75 and 77%. Today it's 24%. And if you don't think that has a very detrimental consequence in the black community, just go on the south side of the Trinity River and you'll see it.
Colonel West, you were running for Texas governor. I can only imagine the discernment process one goes through to run for political office, even more so to be the governor of Texas. Ultimately, why have you decided to run for Texas governor? You know,
I was the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas, and in that position, you can advocate for legislative priorities, different, paths you want to see, the platform of the Republican Party of Texas, but you can't make it happen. And so when I sit back and look at what is going on in our state, I said, I got to step up and be in a position where I can make these things happen. I mean, we should not have a wide open border here in the state of Texas. We should not be, in the state of Texas, the #1 state in the United States of America for human and sex trafficking. We're sitting here in Dallas. Dallas and Houston are the top 2 cities in the United States of America for sex trafficking. We've got to fix that. The drug trafficking crisis that we see that is, affecting our young people, the fentanyl that is coming across, the methamphetamine, and all the other drugs that are coming across. We got to stop that. The fact that 2 weeks ago we learned that airplanes that have taken off from Texas with illegal immigrant minor children are landing in New York, landing in Florida, landing in Tennessee. Last week I was down there in Kinney County, Bracketville, with Sheriff Bradco. Kinney County is about 1,400 square miles. Sheriff Bradco has 6 deputies. 6 deputies can't stay awake 24/7, 365. So last Wednesday night, when I was there from 11:30 to 2 o'clock, down there, doing a little walk tour with him, there are only 2 deputies on. You drive on Highway 90, 277, you see all the cars, DPS, you see the Border Patrol. But I told Sheriff, let's get off into the bush. Nobody's out there. You cannot have a sovereign state unless you protect that sovereignty. And I would have never thought that I would see in my lifetime a president of the United States of America that would abdicate his constitutional duty and responsibility to protect the sovereignty of the United States of America. And now the Constitution gives us as a state the ability to protect our sovereignty, but it's not being done. I think about the property tax issue that we have here. Texans need to own their home, and we should not have the 6th highest property taxes around. And there are effective means by which we can reduce the spending down there in Austin so that we can give you true property tax relief, but we got to transition away from that. I was in the military. I hate being cold. And I really was upset when I was cold in my own house, okay? Right. And that should not happen. But so we need to look at how this incredible energy grid system that we have in Texas, our own, not on the East Coast, not on the West Coast grid, our own. We've got to make sure that we're not being reliant upon an unreliable source of energy, which is the wind and solar, which we gave 23 to 26% of our energy distribution scheme, but yet they failed and they only produced 3% at a critical time. Julian, there was an 11-year-old boy in Conroe, Texas, that froze to death in his bed. Now, I'm a parent. I cannot imagine putting blanket upon blanket upon blanket of my child, trying to keep my child comfortable and warm, and then going in and checking on my child, and he's dead. That should not happen in Texas. I mean, the oil and natural gas resources that we have here, Texas should never look like North Korea at night on a satellite imagery map. So those are some of the reasons why. To protect, again, life, liberty, and property, safety and security for the citizens here in Texas, and to continue to build up our small businesses especially. And I was very disturbed that here in Texas, a governor made the decision as an elected official that he could decide who or what is essential. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who would surrender essential liberty for temporary security in the end deserve neither liberty nor security."
So what do you hope to do differently than your incumbent opponent?
Secure our border, make sure we protect the sovereignty, end this scourge of human and sex trafficking. We have got to confront these cartels, which actually are a transnational narco-criminal terrorist organization, and we're fighting an insurgency. No different from what I saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, because you have non-state, non-uniform belligerents that are firing across an international border. And when you fire across an international border, that's an act of war. And we've got to deal with that. And so we've got to go after their assets that they have here in the state of Texas, and we got to freeze those assets and seize those assets. So those type of things. The property tax relief that people should have. Another thing, and a moral issue that really does, get to me, is that we are chemically and physically castrating children in the state of Texas. We're giving them puberty blockers, hormonal therapies. We are actually having surgeries to remove functioning body parts from our children. Let our children be children. Let them not be indoctrinated, because of an ideological agenda. And I think we have to protect our children. We have to protect our children in the womb. We have to protect our children outside the womb. We have to educate our children so that they can have all the blessings that this great state and this great nation gives to them.
So there are people who are counting you out and say that you cannot win. Why are they wrong?
Because I'm an American paratrooper. Okay, I mean, you can say all you want. The story of paratroopers is that we take on the hard missions. Paratroopers don't want anything easy. If it was easy, give it to the Air Force. I'm just kidding. I got to dig at my brothers in the Air Force. Okay, but the bottom line is that warriors move to the sound of the guns. Warriors take on the tough missions, and warriors stand on principle. And I think that the most important thing that I can show folks here is that I'm not running against anybody. I'm running against a standard of leadership. I'm running to show people that this is what it looks like when someone comes out and they speak to you from the heart, not pure emotion, but emotion by way of loving Texas, loving the country, but telling you that here are the issues and here are the solutions, and this is how we can implement them.
So before we close on our final keys to success here, make the final case. Why Colonel Allen West for governor?
What have I done all my life? I mean, when people did not know me, I was standing on freedom's ramparts to protect your life, liberty, your property, your pursuit of happiness, your way of life. I have always known what that second most important day was for me when I came back through Checkpoint Charlie after seeing East Berlin. And even after taking off the uniform, I still stepped up because someone challenged me to do that by telling me that the oath that I took does not have a statute of limitations. And I was a member of the United States House of Representatives. So when you think about my family, a father who served in World War II in a segregated army as a corporal, my older brother who's a lance corporal in the United States Marine Corps, myself doing 22 years, my nephew who is serving right now in the Army as a lieutenant colonel. For me, my life has always been, in our family, service, sacrifice, and commitment. And that's what I bring to this table.
I love that.
Thanks.
Colonel West, I started the show Pathways to Success because I was fascinated about leadership and to learn how do successful people become successful. And I learned that when you meet with people who've achieved great success and verifiable results, you can sort of backtrack to see what they've done. So we could share those with other people, and that's the purpose of the show. So you have obviously had an incredible career, be it in public service, your military career. So what would you say you have done differently in your life that has allowed you to achieve such great professional success?
I don't think I've done anything different. I love SEC football. I mean, I was born and raised in Georgia, went to the University of Tennessee. And old school SEC football is about two things, two fundamentals, blocking and tackling. And so I think that I just understood the fundamentals about faith, family, and that leads to freedom. My faith is important to me. And when you asked me previously, counting me out or whatever, if God be for you, who can be against you? God told Joshua, be strong and of good courage. The Lord thy God shall never leave you nor forsake you. Isaiah 54:17, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. And Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthens me. That's my foundation. And so I don't see anything as being a daunting task. I see everything as something that if I stick to the fundamentals and be who I'm supposed to be and show people the 5 C's of leadership. And you say, what are the 5 C's of leadership? This is what the military taught me. First C is courage. The second one is competence. The third one is commitment. The next one is conviction. And the last one is character. And if you just stay grounded and rooted in those things, you're going to have success in any leadership role that you have to be in. And your yes has to be a yes, and your no has to be a no. That's what people count on. So that has been, without a doubt, the foundation to my success. It's my faith, then my family. I mean, it was just incredible to be able to grow up, with a mother and father like what I had, that challenged me. My dad challenged me at the age of 15 to be the first officer in the family. That had an incredible impact upon me. I started in high school junior ROTC, and my high school junior ROTC instructors, Lieutenant Colonel Pagonis, Major Heredia, Sergeant First Class McMichael, and Master Sergeant Buchanan, all of them combat veterans, Korea and Vietnam. And they saw something in me that I did not see. And then you go on to the University of Tennessee. And then on 31 July 1982, my dad's on one shoulder, my mom's on the other, and they pin on the second lieutenant bars it and make me an officer in the United States military. That's why family is so important. And that's why we can't have it decimated, because it's that balance that is necessary for our little boys and little girls to get those perspectives on life. And then the last thing is freedom. I just believe that every single one of us inherently, going back to John Locke, we have these freedoms and these liberties that are endowed to us, and we should never surrender them to anyone. But unfortunately, I see a lot of people surrendering their liberties and their freedoms to other people to make decisions about their lives, which again goes back to equality of outcomes and not equality of opportunity. So those have been the pathways of my success. And you got to study. The Bible says study to show thyself approved, and it also says my people suffer for lack of knowledge.
Colonel West, you mentioned your faith is absolutely core, and that is something that you and I share. I am also a Christian, not a good one, but man, I try.
Well, but it's by His grace.
Yeah.
By His grace.
And before I ask this question here for you, I have to share a personal experience to give it some context, if I may. Mm-hmm. So my fiance Rosie and I, we went to Mexico for vacation last year, and we were waiting for the plane to come, and a black woman and her family, they came to sit in front of us. And they were all decked out in BLM attire. Mm-hmm. Without me thinking anything, I felt an aversion, right? And I didn't know anything about them. And they were sitting down there in front of us for 30 minutes, and I was just asking myself, why do I feel this way? I could feel my prejudice coming out, even not knowing anything about that person. But then she did something very interesting. She held her children's hands, and she began to pray.
Yeah.
And she prayed in Jesus' name.
Yeah.
And she was asking for guidance and for help. It changed my heart in that moment and helped me see the error of my ways. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say this is because even though there was this separation in terms of ideology, like our value, our shared value, mm-hmm. it transcended because we had a higher moral authority. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is this, for the honest seeker, for someone who wants to know if God exists, what would you say the steps are for them to begin to explore the possibility of the existence of God?
First of all, you have to open up your heart to be obedient and to receive, God to talk to you. I mean, that's the key thing. If you're going into it and saying that I'm going to put up a wall, then God's not going to be able to come through that wall. You have to open up your heart, and you have to earnestly, pray, show yourself to me, reveal yourself to me, let me know that you exist. And I think that's the first step. But the interesting thing about, the people that you were saying that you sat there and saw with the BLM, Black Lives Matter, and she's praying. But yet, the people that founded Black Lives Matter are avowed Marxists. And Marx talked about religion being the opiate of the masses. He was an atheist.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to what I say, people aren't educated. People aren't informed. People just hear a sound bite or read a headline, and they say, I'm all in for that. And furthermore, if I had been sitting there, I would say, ma'am, thank you for that beautiful prayer. It just really touched my heart. And then I would open up a conversation. And I said, which Black Lives Matter? I said, the 25 million almost Black lives that have been murdered in the womb since 1973, Roe v. Wade, do those matter? The Black lives that are lost just about every single day, especially over the weekends in places like Chicago, any inner city, do those lives matter? I said, so which Black lives matter? Do the Black lives matter that need to have a better education opportunity, but yet in the state of Texas we can't pass school choice so that they can have that opportunity? And so I think that's where we find that common ground, like you saw, that spiritual connection. But then we have to go a little bit further to have that conversation, a genuine conversation, to get people to explain, but yet as you're getting them to explain, you're also opening their eyes and you're revealing things to them.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because after she did that, I wanted to come up to her and tell her I was sorry, right? I didn't have the courage to go up to her because I didn't want to look like a crazy person, right? But what happened in that moment is I was willing to have an honest conversation because of these shared ideals. And so much of what I see nowadays is people are not willing to have a conversation. But if that one particular use case drew us together because of a transcendent authority that we believed in, I think there's something there to be
But don't be willing to have the conversation from the low ground by coming up and saying, I'm sorry. Be willing to have the conversation from that equal perspective on the positive.
Right.
And then go from there.
I think I see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Colonel West, I like to close our conversations with a few kind of fun questions just for the audience to get to know you a little bit more.
Okay.
So the first is this. What is your favorite food?
Grilled hot dogs.
Grilled hot dogs.
I'm simple. There's nothing like a grilled hot dog, man. Okay.
A grilled hot dog.
Followed by fried chicken. Okay, but grilled hot dog.
Grilled hot dog and fried chicken, for the record. Music you're listening to right now?
I am. I think it's channel 25 on Sirius XM, classic rock.
Classic
back
rock.
from the 80s, cassette, and also contemporary Christian.
Very good. If you do watch TV, what inspires you nowadays?
When Texas A&M beat Alabama, that really inspired me because that's our common enemy is the University of Alabama. But no, look, I mean, what inspires me is, again, the love of country, the love of this incredible state, the history of this incredible state, and just my desire to make people want to stand up and realize that you don't have to sit back and take mediocrity. You should always set your sights high.
What is something that you're very proud of that no one really knows about?
Oh, man. Just being a husband, being a dad, being a granddad. I mean, when I get the chance to hold my little 5-month-old grandson, there's nothing like that pride. And being able to, on Sunday at church, and then afterwards having the whole family together for dinner, that's it. Because life is about the legacy that you pass on. And so now I have a legacy that goes to my daughters, and now I have another generation with my grandson.
And that ties into my final question here. The show is called The Pathways to Success. How do you personally define what success is?
Success is not based upon what you achieve and what you have in your life. Success is what subsequent generations have. And so when I think about my dad and my mom, my dad was born in 1920, my mom was born in 1931, down south, tough times, but here I am sitting with you. That's the testimony to their success. And I just pray that my daughters and my grandchildren will also be a testimony and evidence of the success because they carried on that legacy.
Colonel West, this has been an absolute pleasure. If you would please tell our audience, everyone tuning into the live stream, how to connect with you, follow the campaign.
Sure.
Tell us all that.
West, 4Texas.com, West, 4Texas.com, and all the social media platforms. We're on that, and I appreciate it.
And we'll make sure to have all of your contact information in the show notes as well. Sir, this has been an absolute pleasure.
All mine. Thanks.
And everyone else, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The Pathways to Success. As always, make sure to subscribe, comment, and share. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of The Pathways to Success.